Thomas Frank is one of our most trenchant political observers. He is the author of many books you should read if you haven't, including Listen Liberal, The People Come Unknown, and What's the Matter with Kansas.
Do you remember this book?
I do remember. I forget.
It was two reporters for the Philadelphia newspaper did a whole series about inequality in America. It came out in 91. And it was a massive bestseller, paperback original. Anyhow, it was about inequality. This is at the tail end of the Reagan Revolution, Reagan and then George Bush Sr. And it was, all this sort of shock and dismay at inequality, at how much more CEOs made than average people, so the book is just absolutely filled with statistics, who pays the taxes, who doesn't pay, all this sort of stuff. And it actually, and it was shocking at the time. And now you look at it and it's like, we have gone so much further than that. I was born in 1965. This is the year of the Great Society. Lyndon Johnson was getting everything passed through Congress, Medicare, the various civil rights acts, all of the war on poverty stuff, and was also getting us into Vietnam, the seeds of his own destruction.
So what the hell went wrong? I mean, I'm not saying we were great then. Racism was endemic.
No, you're right. No, America was hardly a place without problems. I mean, geez, 1965,
right.
March to Montgomery, But
in terms of economic democracy, Tom.
In terms of the direction we were going. Now, this is the critical thing about history. The object of history is not to say people in the past were bad. The thing is to determine understand the direction things were moving. And we were moving towards social democracy in 1965. I mean, Martin Luther King talked about it all the time. Lyndon Johnson talked about it all the time. We were the most, we were the richest country in the world. We were, and the thing that gets me about it is we were not just a rich country. We are still, of course, today, but the way wealth was distributed in America in those days was surprisingly democratic. Working class people often made as much money or close to as much money as their white collar superiors. John Brooks, he wrote about I read him a lot, but this was a book of his from 1966 describing the rise of what they used to call the affluent society.
Right.
Basically, the idea of mass prosperity for everyone.
Cultural touchstone that I always go to for that, Tom, is back in that day when I was 10, 11, 12, the cartoons we watched were the Flintstones and the Jetsons, right?
Yes.
And
the average family.
The average family in Paleolithic times with a little stone car that he moved with his feet. But the Jetsons, this was the projection of what, 1999 would be like, based on the growth curve that the middle class was seeing. George Jetson worked 2 hours a week at Spacely Sprockets. That was his work week, 2 hours. And on that salary, he could afford a saucer-shaped home in the sky, a flying car, a robot maid, and to raise a family of 4. And that was the expectation, based on the fact that worker growth and employer, investor growth were rising at roughly the same rate.
Yes. By the way, this is always the sort of vision of the future from that period is always like that. The middle, things are just going to get better and better for the middle class. The World's Fair was held that year in New York City.
I was there. I remember General Motors diorama of the future was the big attraction, the city of the future, and of course
By the way, as it had been in the 1939 World's Fair, this was it was the Futurama in 39. Well, look, the reason to bring all this up is to talk about how different we are today. I mean, same country, same people. I'm still here. You're still here, but if you look at how things have changed over the years, and it's absolutely catastrophic. You look at the richest man in the world in 1965 was J. Paul Getty, oil billionaire, and he was worth a little over $1 billion. That was his net worth. You think about that today, where the billionaires earn many times what his net worth was in 1 year. They shoot themselves up into space, and the working class people. The idea of the working class person living with the same standard of living as a billionaire is comical. It's a joke. The middle class world is falling apart. And the middle class standard of living is a dream that nobody has anymore. The life expectancy rate is going in reverse these days, and not just because of COVID, because of what they call the deaths of despair,
right?
Which is alcoholism, opioids, guns, this kind of suicide. Yep. Yeah. This is the great subject of our time. The destruction of that world that I was born into, the middle class society. You think about like the price of college. It was almost free in 1965. It was free if you went to a state U in a lot of places. Now you've got a generation of kids in debt. I mean, the price of college. I went to the University of Chicago for graduate school. What does it cost now? It's over $80,000 for a year. That's all included. This is. We are coming apart as a society, is what I'm getting at. The thing is, why can't we do anything about it? What the hell is wrong with us? Everybody knows this, by the way. Everybody knows it. Joe Biden knows it. Barack Obama gave a famous speech about it. Donald Trump gave many speeches about it in 2016. In some ways, this is because he spoke to the anger out there. He captured it in a certain way, in a way that Obama had done as well in 2008. They all do this. Bill Clinton, for God's sakes, in 1992, when he was on the campaign trail, waved a copy of America What Way. He would carry it around with him on the campaign trail. We all know this. And it just gets worse and worse and worse.
This shift the Democratic Party took from being the party of the working person, I used to say a working man, but, working people, to the party of the credentialed,
Yes, this is an enormous shift. And it's often hard for young people to understand this. And the part of it that they can't understand, the thing about the Democrats being a party of the credentialed, party of the white collar, highly educated elites, they get that. It's the other part they don't get, that the Democrats were something different once. And I have to say, look, in 1965, they really were the party of organized labor. I mean, the unions built the Democratic Party. They were they were enormously important in the Democratic Party. And that's, we can talk about how that changed, how the party changed its focus. I've written now 2 books about that. It is a fascinating subject. It took decades, but it is mission accomplished. It has fully happened. This is a party that in its heart of hearts doesn't really have a problem with inequality. Doesn't have a problem with inequality because it identifies with meritocracy. It identifies with people who have done well on those tests, who got the Regents Scholarship, got a great score on their SAT. What was Pete Buttigieg? What's his claim to fame? Was he a Rhodes Scholar, or a Marshall Scholar, or something like that? But this is if you look at like Barack Obama's. Bill Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar. Barack Obama's cabinet was filled with these guys. And by the way, Barack Obama spoke very eloquently about what had happened to the middle class. He gave a great speech about this that really opened my eyes at the time. It was 2011. And he's quite eloquent, as always, about this. It talks about everything that I've just said, talks about that in his own way, using his own family story. His mom was from Wichita, Kansas. He tells that story. And, and it's great. And you say to yourself, these guys understand the problem. He totally gets it. How come he couldn't do anything about it? How come his administration did so very vanishingly little to solve the problem of inequality? And when I say that, I'm not just like, wagging my finger at him. I mean, on paper, statistics. The problem got worse and worse and worse during his presidency. And you can point at the mistakes that he made that brought that about. Like, for example, that he never got tough with Wall Street. He had the perfect opportunity. He's elected on this colossal majority, has an incredible mandate. The whole world is behind him. He could have done anything he wanted to these guys. Like, the world is looking for a Franklin Roosevelt to come in and clean this industry up. And he didn't do it. Right. Everybody got their bonuses. Everybody got their bailouts. Nobody got fired. Nobody got prosecuted.
My guess was that, but I'm curious, of course, curious as to yours. My guess was that, among other things, he wanted the approval of the in-group, the Larry Summers and those types of people.
Right, but why didn't they? Those are smart guys. They know this problem too. Why didn't they want to solve it? This is the great mystery of the Obama years that you have to, that I try to answer in Listen Liberal. These guys know what's going on. What the hell happened? Why couldn't they take forceful measures? You look at Lyndon Johnson in the 60s doing, boom, 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 legislative measure after, thing after thing after thing, to make America. Well, the Appalachian Authority, the Highway Beautification Act, he goes on and on. What the stuff the guy was doing was just incredible. And, building schools, building roads, and, doing all of these TVA style projects. And Obama's not able to do that. Why not? And a big part of it is that the Democrats don't believe in that anymore. But what do they believe in? And the answer. To ask it is to answer it. What do they believe in? It's education.
Will you tell me?
Education. It's always education.
Right.
So they say we've got this terrible problem in America. The middle class is falling to pieces. What's the answer?
Yeah.
Everybody has to get a college degree. Everybody has to become like us. And this is Obama's speech in Osawatomie. He pivots from talking about the destruction of the middle class, as I say, very eloquently, to talking about the solution, which is everybody has to go and make this. He called it an investment. You have to make your college investment. You have to, and this is when you think about, and this is that whole generation of Democrats. This is always the answer. So Bill Clinton would also say the same thing. Look, where deindustrialization is happening. Globalization is happening. There's nothing we can do about it. We can't do it. Hey, we're powerless. The United States, we're powerless to do anything about this. The only thing that you can do is get an education, and then the bosses will, they'll approve of what you've done and they'll pay you better and the market will smile on us and the money will come back. This is so much BS, Richard, but they believe it. This is the Democratic Party sincerely, up until very recently, sincerely believed this. Why? Why do they believe it? They believe it for exactly the reason that you gave before, because they themselves rose via this mechanism. So both Clinton and Obama, and basically all of these guys, that's how they made their way to the sort of exalted perch that they now occupy, is through by doing well in school, by getting high test scores, doing all those things. This is not a solution. We can all see that. But what makes it infuriating is that this is not an answer for inequality. This is a way of rationalizing inequality.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
This is a way of saying these people on top, they're up there because they played the game right. They're up there because they deserve to be up there. They're up there because they're so smart. They did well in school.
And that was the old right-wing ideology. That was the Horatio Alger.
But they would, the Ayn Rand thing, but they would have put it differently. They would have said because they succeeded in business, they were good at, they fought their way to the top. It's just a different meritocracy. So Democrats love the meritocracy of higher ed. Republicans love the meritocracy of corporate service or whatever, small business. When the party of the left has given up being a party of working people and is instead a party of, I don't want to say the elite, because there's a lot of elites in American society, but it is the party of an elite, white collar, highly educated, very prosperous people. When that happens, all sorts of things change. Your way of looking at the world changes. And when all of these other institutions like journalism also follow the same trajectory, there is very little. I mean, how many newspapers in America still have, there aren't even very many newspapers in America. This is part of the phenomenon we're describing is the death of the newspaper. When you destroy the traditional left, or when the traditional left obsoletes itself, which is what happened in America, the Democratic Party is not interested in being the party of working people anymore. It's got a different model, a model that is very much focused on education and on the highly educated elite and the righteousness thereunto pertaining. When you have a party of the left that does that and leaves behind, the traditional left is no longer the focus of a political party, what happens? And all of these different things, and this is a story of our times, by the way, all of these different things happen. Among other things, inequality spirals out of control. We all know that because neither party really cares about it. I mean, they know it's happening. Both Trump and Obama and Biden, they all know it's happening. And they have their different ways of addressing it, but nobody really cares. Nobody really wants to do anything about it. Anything real like Lyndon Johnson or Franklin Roosevelt, nothing like that. The right has been trying to do this for years. This is what they call now, this is what I call phony populism, this sort of fake populism that the right has dabbled in for a very long time. Do you remember a guy called Richard Viguerie?
Of course. Yeah, I don't know.
He was one of the leading minds of what was called the New Right back in the 70s.
Right.
And Viguerie actually wrote a book about populism in 1983. And this was, I mean, populism is the sort of one name that you could give to the traditional left that I'm talking about, the laborist, multiracial left. That's about social democracy. And Viguerie knew this, but he was like, the right can occupy this space. That's been he didn't invent that idea, by the way. That was floating around in the ether even before then. But that has become the sort of guiding idea of the right. I mean, Trump is out there trying to occupy this space in 2016 and rhetorically doing it to some degree. Now, he didn't do anything as president. He did jack all as president. Got another tax cut passed for the rich, right? Deregulated everything, We've just been through a real life experiment, RJ, in social democracy from the top down. We elected Barack Obama. He got 2 terms. He had a massive majority. He got whatever he wanted. And it didn't do anything. It didn't change the course that we were on. It didn't alter the distribution of wealth. It didn't bring back the middle class society. It didn't. I mean, he got he got this very weak version of universal health care done. That's about the best you can say. But on the main task for which he was elected, dealing with Wall Street, very, very little. We just had this long experiment in social democracy from the top down. From the, president of Harvard is going to do it for you. All these smart guys gathered around the cabinet room are going to do it for you. And they didn't do anything. And we can now say, I think, conclusively that model of reform failed. That model of reform simply does not deliver. There's a different model, though. This is one that Goodwin wrote about all his life. The different model of reform, and that's reform from the bottom up. Right. That's what populism was. That's what the civil rights movement was. And that's what the labor movement in the 1930s was. To some degree, that's what the New Deal was. And Larry Goodwin wrote about this all his life. And then he took a step back and wrote a theoretical essay about it. Well, how do you do that? I mean, it's difficult. How do you get to one of those great moments like populism in the 1890s or like the 1930s or like the 1960s? How do you do it? And he said, basically the answer is you have to build a movement. You have to have a giant, vast social movement, not of Harvard presidents, not of Rhodes scholars, but of ordinary people, by which I mean working class people, by which I mean people that didn't go to college. It doesn't mean college people are excluded or Harvard presidents are excluded. They can be part of it, of course, but the force and the energy and even the leadership has to come from ordinary rank and file Americans. Well, how do you do that? And so he wrote a whole article about how you do it. And the part of it that really got me was he said, it can't be about ideological purity. He called that Leninist. He despised that approach. He called it cannot be about ideological purity. Understanding things better than everybody else, having the right lingo, that sort of thing. It has to be about, you have to show what he called ideological patience. You can't judge the ordinary people. Your object is to bring them together into a mass movement that will make change in this sort of sweeping, overwhelming fashion. And they will be changed just by being members of the mass movement. But to insist, for example, that they know the rhetoric before they sign up, or that they, have that they that they speak the jargon or whatever it is automatically doomed to failure. Automatically doomed to failure. That's, when we to build a leftist movement based on ideological purity is a disaster. You will never achieve anything.